They said the Cold War was over. But the air never got the memo. The wind at 40,000 feet still carried the echoes of an old game, a silent one, written not in ink but in thrust ratios, radar pulses, and missile locks where men's names were replaced by call signs and coordinates. And that morning, the sky over the Black Sea wore the old tension like a cloak, stretched taut across invisible borders, drawn in the minds of generals who knew the cost of open conflict, but still kept their pawns polished and ready. And so it began, quietly, at 0417 hours when AWACS registered 2 radar ghosts, crawling up the eastern horizon, Su-27 flankers, unannounced, flying cold and dark. No transponders, no IFF, no voice chatter, just twin silver needles sewing, a stitch across disputed airspace. While below them, the sea glinted like steel, and above, the clouds parted just enough to let their shadows pass. And somewhere hundreds of miles away, on tarmac still wet with dawn, 2 pilots strapped into their Eagles, the F-15C still roaring from pre-flight checks, their fingers twitching on HOTAS, as the tower voice crackled to life with words that barely needed, saying, intercept protocol, heads up radar lock, rules of engagement standing by, engage only if threatened. And they knew, as they always knew, that threatened was a line that didn't exist until someone crossed it with fire. And so Mage, Will Harrison, and Captain was Eli. Park lifted into the gray with Burn behind them and Steele ahead, rising past the clouds until the curvature of the earth revealed the sea's edge like a whisper, and they banked north toward tension, toward flickers of red on their scopes that pulsed and danced, as if daring them to come closer. And they did, slicing the sky with vapor trails that split the heavens in perfect mirrored arcs. And then suddenly, they saw them. Not dots or ghosts, but machines. Su-27s gliding forward like knives unsheathed, holding altitude, closing in, their silhouettes painting threats across the sun. And it happened fast, because it always does. Because no dogfight ever waits for protocol. And one flanker flared upward like a shark lunging from deep, wings glittering with flares and heat decoys as it spiraled toward the blinding gold of the morning sun, while the other dove left and low, vanishing beneath a cloud bank like a phantom slipping under a curtain. And Park's voice shouted across the radio, "They're moving, breaking formation." And Harrison didn't hesitate, didn't blink, just pressed his mind into action and thumbed the trigger, HUD flashing lock in green fury as the Amaram leapt forward, slicing the sky with fire. And time seemed to stall as the missile tore a path through nothingness, while Park chased shadows, twisting his Eagle between clouds that pulsed with sunlight and shivered with cold, his instruments beeping a low, urgent rhythm like a heartbeat under duress. And then there was noise, static, then shouting, "Missile! Break! Break!" And the world flipped. Literally, as Park rolled inverted, yanked hard on the stick, pulled 6 Gs, through a gut-wrenching turn that pressed the air from his lungs and the sweat from his skin, flares launching behind him in bursts of orange that danced like devils on his tail. And the R-27 slid past, too close. Close enough that his canopy lit white for a second before the missile vanished into oblivion. And Harrison's AMRAAM found its mark, bursting against the lead flanker, in a plume of fire that tore the jet in half mid-roll. The explosion so bright it burned across, the cloud ceiling in reflections that made it look like the sun had cracked open, and debris spiraled like falling leaves, like torn feathers of an angel who had flown too high. And below, the ocean absorbed it all without comment, without witness, just a long streak of smoke marking where steel had fallen. And Harrison whispered, "Splash one," more to himself than anyone. But there was no time to celebrate, because the second Su-27 had returned, roaring from the clouds like an avenger, its nose painted with fire and its engines screaming vengeance. And before either Eagle could react, another missile screamed from under its wing, and Park took the hit, partial impact. Not direct, but enough to rip open his port engine, enough to tear through the stabilizer and light the sky behind him with smoke and fear. And his Eagle bucked once, then again, and then began to drop. Slow at first, then faster, like a wounded bird fighting gravity with one wing. And inside the cockpit, his warning lights danced a cruel rhythm, red against red, alarms blaring, and his oxygen mask fogged as he exhaled pain and panic. "Mayday, mayday, I'm hit." and Harrison called back. "I've got you, stay with me." His voice steady, too steady, like he had to be calm enough for them both. And Park fought the stick, fought the tilt, fought the fear clawing at the edges of his helmet, until he found level again, barely. At 12,000 feet, one engine out, fuel bleeding, smoke trailing like a black ribbon across a sky now burning with sunrise, and the flanker, gone, fled eastward into the light, a shadow swallowed by its own silence, unwilling to die but not bold enough to stay. And Harrison didn't follow, not because he couldn't, but because his wingman needed him more than the kill. And that's what eagles do, they protect, even when the skies forget to thank them. They limped back together, two silhouettes against a golden horizon, one trailing fire, the other flying guard. And the silence inside the cockpits was louder than any missile. They were alive. And that was enough, but as they landed, the ground crews ran like firemen to a burning house, eyes wide at the damage, hands reaching to lift the canopy as Park slumped inside, shaking, blood in his visor from the G-forces. Oil streaked across his gloves, but alive, and Harrison climbed out slower, more deliberate, the weight of what they'd just escaped written in sweat across his brow. And neither man spoke at first. Because what do you say when war almost visits and then leaves without a name? The reports were filed, quiet and incomplete. Command used phrases, like a breach of protocol and unauthorized maneuvers and engagement under rawy ambiguity, but none of those words captured the heat, the noise, the smell of burning jet fuel, or the scream of metal torn from sky. The Russians never acknowledged the loss. No news outlets ran the story. But every pilot who flew that week knew what had happened. And in the ready rooms, over stale coffee and cracked knuckles, they whispered, "Did you hear? They fired!" And somewhere in a hangar corner, Harrison's AMRAAM rack still bore a scorch mark. And Park's helmet still had a crack along the side where the canopy shrapnel kissed it. And even weeks later, long after the debriefings faded and new flights took their place, the Eagles flew just a little tighter, just a little harder, because they had felt the breath of history on their necks, and it was cold. They said the Cold War was over, but it wasn't. It was just quiet, waiting, coiled like a viper above the cloud line, ready to strike whenever steel met silence and men were forced to choose between retreat and resolve. And that morning, above the Black Sea, two Eagles didn't blink, and two flankers crossed a line the world never saw, and fire answered. And though no monuments will ever be built for that clash, and no children will study it in textbooks, the sky remembers and the pilots remember, and the clouds still carry echoes of that forgotten battle, when war almost returned, and for 7 minutes, the cold turned hot once more.